For sports lovers, 2020 has been a difficult year. Abbreviated and canceled seasons have robbed many of us of a favorite diversion. Rewatching old games may fill the time, but there is nothing like seeing a competition live and in person. I, for one, can't wait until the day I can again attend a Dodger game here in Los Angeles. Now, Andrew Bernstein has always enjoyed the best seat in the house as a sports photographer. Not only has he photographed practically every sport event that there is, including the Olympics, he has served as team photographer for the LA Lakers, LA Kings, LA Clippers, and LA Dodgers. In addition, he's also held the position of director of photography for both Staples Center and Microsoft Theater LA. He now has his own podcast, Legends of Sport. In his lengthy career, he's developed many friendships, not least of which was with Kobe Bryant, with whom he collaborated on the book, The Mamba Mentality, How I Play. Andy's career is special, not because of the many iconic images he's made, but because he's demonstrated that he is the kind of man who puts in the extra effort and time to be a great photographer, a good father, and a good man. This is Ibarian X, and welcome back to The Candid Frame. Well, first off, welcome to the show. It's good to have you.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here. Happy to be anywhere.
It's always nice to talk to a legend.
Oh, boy. That's code word for old there, my friend.
I know. We can talk a lot about your career as a sports photographer, and that's what we're going to spend a lot of time doing. But I always, when I talk to sports photographers or anyone who's been like covering the game for a long time, I always like hearing the story of the first live event, sport event that they ever went to that was like significant for them. And what would that be for you?
The first one I shot?
No, not the one you shot, but that you went to maybe as a kid.
Well, that's a great question. I would have to say I grew up a Mets fan, and I also was a Rangers fan growing up. I remember distinctly going to a Mets game with my dad. I probably was maybe 7 or 8. And we were sitting behind home plate at Chase Stadium, probably like sort of halfway up, maybe third deck or something. And a foul ball came our way, straight back. My dad shoved me out of the way and caught it with one hand.
Wow, really?
A tremendous amount of spin going, I'll never forget that. I'm glad you reminded me of that. That was 50-something years ago. That's amazing.
That's a great memory to have of a first game.
Yeah. Well, it's better than getting hit in the head with a puck, But it was no, it was a great memory. I had that ball forever. I don't know what happened to it in various moves over the years. On the hockey side, I remember going to see the Rangers play. And back in the day, we used to go to the old Madison Square Garden. This is the garden that was up on 10th Avenue, I believe, before they built the new garden in 1971. And the old garden had these pillars that, the new garden had the suspended ceiling, which made it so revolutionary. The old garden was like an old auditorium, and it had these pillars that came down, and they sold seats literally behind the pillars that were called obstructed view seats. And it had it stamped on the ticket, obstructed view. And you literally are sitting behind a pillar. And that's where me, the kid, would always sit. I'd have to sit in the stoop behind the pillar every single time because my dad would get the tickets for like 50 cents, So that's one of my earliest memories of going to Ranger games.
I went to, I can't remember which was first, whether it was a Rams game at the old Coliseum. That was my first, or whether it was a Dodger game.
Yeah.
But the experience that I remember was just the noise of so many people.
Yeah.
And just, it's unlike any other feeling I've ever had, where I have just thousands of people around you at the same time. And there's something that I think is, very alluring about that, whether you are a sports fan, a sports player, or in your case of a photographer.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the intoxication of just that feeling at that sound and what it does for you, especially when you're out there virtually in the center of it.
It's so funny you're bringing this up because the last month or so, this is going to sound really weird, but I've had this crazy ringing in my ear, both my ears equally, right? Yeah. Which I've never experienced. So I go to my doctor, I get a hearing test, the whole thing that they do. And it comes back, I have, like 20% hearing loss at the high frequency, not unusual for my age. The audiologist says to me, he says, what kind of, let me just ask you, what kind of work do you do? And I said, well, I'm a sports photographer. And are you in noisy environments? She says. I said, yeah. She says, when's the last time you were in one? I said, 4 months ago. And she said, well, do you ever experience this when you're in a loud arena or a stadium? I said, not consciously. She said, well, maybe you're having withdrawal. Seriously. maybe your brain is consciously like hearing it because it was so used to hearing it for 40 years. Isn't that weird? That's so bizarre. It is intoxicating, and it is something that I absolutely gravitate towards and feed off of, and the energy of the fans and just the buzz in the arena. And I could cite a million examples for you. I mean, most notably, the loudest arena stadium I'd ever been in my life was Dodger Stadium when Kirk Gibson hit the home run in '88. Oh. And literally felt like the stadium was going to crack in half because it was just thunderous. And it went on for, I don't know, 7 or 8 minutes straight. And the upper decks were just shaking. It was like, earthquake, basically. And then every NBA Finals, I remember Kobe's last game in 2016. It is an amazing experience. And now, I'm up against going to shoot the NBA in the bubble situation, and there being no fans there. That whole element, that whole, part of the game, which the players feed off of course, the energy is going to be gone. So I'm very curious to see how that all pans out.
When did you know that you wanted to be not just a photographer, but a sports photographer?
Well, I took up photography at 14. My dad bought me an old Canon TL film camera, and that was right before the summer of my 14th year. And we went and hit all the major national parks out west. For a city kid, that was unbelievable. But I really took to photography. And I actually have a funny story to tell you if you have a minute.
Oh, yeah.
So back in the day, we used to shoot film, obviously. Kodachrome was kind of the film you would get, and it would come with a mailer. I don't know if you're old enough to remember.
Yeah, I do.
You would buy Kodachrome film, and it would come literally with a mailer, prepaid mailer, that wherever you were in the country, you could literally put it into a mailbox anywhere, and it would go to Rochester, and then a week or two later, you would have this yellow box come back to your house, right? With your slides in it. So my dad and I bought a whole bunch of mailers. He had given me this camera. I really didn't have a chance to learn it at all. And my dad was a doctor, but he considered himself, among other things, to be an amateur photographer. So he was going to teach me, the kid, how to do photography on this trip. We're going through all the national parks, and we're taking pictures, and he's taking pictures of his. He had an FTB Canon camera. I had the TL. And we're putting the film in each other's mailers, and sending it off to Rochester. And it's going great, and I'm, having a lot of fun learning how to use the camera, and my dad's, showing me. We get back home, and there's probably 60 of these little yellow boxes waiting there. My mom had piled up on the dining room table. And they don't have either of our names. It just says Bernstein on it. So we're going through these envelopes and these boxes, and I'm looking at him, and he's looking at his, ones he picks up, and he goes, "Oh, these pictures are unbelievable. Look at this roll of film I shot. I got Old Faithful, and I got the Grand Canyon, and look at this one at Mount Rainier." And I said, "Well, hold on, Dad. Like, can I see that roll for a second?" And he shows me the roll, and I go through it. And about 4 or 5 pictures in, there's a picture of him, like at Mount Rainier. I said, "Well, hold on, Pop. That's not your roll. That's my roll." It's my roll of film. So he was like mortified because he wanted, obviously, to have a hand up on me. But we laughed about it years later, because that was really the epiphany. That was the moment that I knew that I had a little bit of skill and a little bit of talent, and all that sort of coalesced later on. In fact, that same year, when a good friend of mine, his name was Andrew Feldman, and he had a darkroom in his basement in his house in Brooklyn. And he took me in the darkroom and showed me how to develop film and how to make prints. And I'll tell you, man, when I saw that first print come up in the developer in the tray, and saw it literally like that magic trick. I mean, I'm sure you remember it. It's like a magic trick. You have this blank piece of paper, which you put some, a light on and an image on an enlarger. You put in this solution, and like 20 seconds later, an image comes up that you actually created in your brain that got translated through your camera and is now coming up in this solution. And that was like the giant light bulb.
Yeah.
I knew that I could literally create something that was tangible and creative and interesting. The sky was the limit at that point.
But how do you associate a career in photography with a career in sports?
Well, that's an easy answer because I was always the shortest kid on my block. So I was always the last one picked for pick up baseball, pick up basketball, pick up football, street hockey. I played all those sports and I was decent at it, but I was like the littlest, scrawniest kid. So I knew I'd never have any career whatsoever in high school and, beyond. Although my dream was to be shortstop for the Mets because Bud Harrelson was my idol. That's a whole other story. But I realized very quickly that I had two passions. I had a passion for sports and I had a passion for photography. And what better way than to merge them and have the best seat in the house, quite frankly, which, I've had for 40 years. So it's been a gift.
You went to Art Center, College of Design.
Right.
That school is primarily geared for people interested in commercial photography, not so much sports. And I've taught there, so I've seen that the great majority of the students have an interest in photography. Not many who are interested in doing sports.
Right.
And one of the things that I often notice, if a student is there is very dedicated to a particular aspect of photography that's not being reflected with what the other students are doing, it can be kind of a challenge because not just the curriculum, but also the other students are looking at you going, what do you think you're doing?
Yeah.
So tell me about the sort of pushback that you might have gotten while you were there before you actually got started in your career. Did it prove to be a little more difficult to get through school?
Well, you're being incredibly diplomatic because I was to say I was the black sheep of my class would be an understatement. Everyone in my class, I went into Art Center, there were two classes the year when I went in, the spring of 78. And I think it was 38 of us split into two classes. And everyone was interested in either product photography, car photography, of course, studio stuff, anything involving, anything in the studio, fashion, portraiture, whatever. I was really the only one who was interested in photojournalism. Hadn't really decided 100% on sports at that point when I first went there. I was discouraged from day one. I mean, every teacher I had the first 3 terms, except for one teacher, completely dismissed my dream and my ambition. And the first 3 terms of Art Center, you're basically in the darkroom 24 hours a day anyway. And you're not really focusing on what your true interest is because they expect to develop that over those 3 terms. And it's an 8-term curriculum. So I had one teacher named Bill Robbins, who was my advertising teacher, who really just saw that, hey, you know what? This guy's got a dream. He's got ambition. He's got some Brooklyn moxie. And he encouraged me, along with my the only photojournalism teacher that any of us had at Art Center was a guy named Jim Kakavo. Jim was a Vietnam veteran, war photographer. He worked for the Red Cross during Vietnam War. And he saw that passion in me as well. So both of these gentlemen became mentors throughout my time at Art Center and have stayed mentors of mine, 40 plus years later. I mean, these are good friends of mine I could call at any moment and lean on and ask for advice. Jim and I actually went full circle, and he actually taught a class with me at a youth center in the Rampart District a number of years ago, which was super fun. And then I've been working with Bill as an adjunct instructor at Mount St. Mary's University, where he's now the chairman of the photo department there after leaving Brooks after Brooks closed, but he was with Brooks for a long time. So I get to my 8th term review with the chairman, the great Charlie Potts, who I'm sure you've heard of, and Charlie, legend. I mean, he was a contemporary of Ansel Adams. I mean, legend. And I remember Charlie just sitting back and looking at my portfolio, which you had to you had a mandatory meeting with the chairman before your 8th term. And he just sat back and said, there's no way you're going to make a living doing this. He says, what's your fallback position? I said, I got no fallback position. I'm going to make a living. He said, nobody. I remember him like it was yesterday, and I loved him to death. He said, nobody makes a living doing sports photography. And just looked at me right in the eye. I said, really? Have you heard of John Zimmerman? Have you heard of Neil Leifer? Have you heard of Walter Yost? Blah, blah, blah. And he goes, well, there are exceptions, son. I said, yes, I expect to be one of those exceptions, Mr. Potts. Thank you very much. Closed up my portfolio. Got my degree after my 8th term. But my good friend and teacher, mentor, Bill Robinson, introduced me to Lane Stewart from Sports Illustrated. He was an SI staffer. I did my first assignment as an assistant with him, and then he introduced me to the local LA photographers, Peter Reed Miller, Richard Maxon, Andy Haight. And that's where I really learned the craft and what I needed to do. You know, I was learning the science of photography. I was learning a lot about lighting, which was great at Art Center. But to be a sports photographer, I really needed to learn it like on the ground, on the job, in the arenas, in the stadiums. And that's what I did. And also, just to round it out, the whole thing is that, as you probably know, we're not given a lot of business training at Art Center. There's a lot of sort of presumption that, oh, you go to Art Center, you're going to be a successful photographer. But they don't teach you how to run a business. I had one business class, which the great Errol Gerson, thank God he was the instructor, and he's still a great friend and mentor and guide and financial advisor and everything else in my business. And I got to work for Bill in his studio and learn how to run a studio, learn how to deal with clients, learn how to go to the bank, open a checking account, pay vendors, go to the lab, all the things that we do as part of running a business, which Art Center really honestly took for granted or just didn't care to teach us. That was unbelievably valuable to me, and very thankful for Bill for bringing me, into the studio to learn that.
What did you learn about being a sports photographer that you only could have learned by working with these guys, specifically with respect to how you had to approach what you did? Because to the amateur, it's all about, getting a great shot. But to my way of thinking, you really have to think about how these images are going to be used. So how did that knowledge informed how you worked, how you shot, how you interacted, not only with the athletes, but anyone that, the owners of the team, the magazines, the newspapers, and so on?
Well, first and foremost, I had to learn everything technically that I could possibly learn. And most specifically, I had to learn the technique of lighting indoor arenas with strobes. My dream was to shoot Laker games, shoot Kings games at the Forum using strobes. And there were only a handful of people in the country, quite honestly, at the time, who knew how to install these giant strobe units, these big Speedotron strobe units. And I was trained by a guy named David Keith, who at the time was the head assistant on the West Coast for Sports Illustrated. And he took me under his wing and showed me how to do it. Through my connections with the photographers that I was working for, and most of the assignments being at the Forum, I was able to kind of, open the little crack of the door and stick my little Brooklyn foot in there and kind of make some connections, and soon discovered that strobe photography was far superior than what they were getting. And I was able to finagle my way in exchange for credentials. I was able to get, the ability to put my strobes in, and then I was starting to sell pictures as a small stock picture agency and what have you. So by being around these photographers, learning this lighting technique, but also learning how they interact with the athletes and how they interact with the PR directors, and if you're shooting an executive, like you said, and whatever it is, on assignment, that was the most valuable kind of on-the-job training that I could get, because you have to establish a relationship with these people from the moment they meet you. And most of them don't want their picture taken. They're not comfortable in front of the camera. They're not trained models. They're not even CEOs who are used to having their picture taken or being in front of the camera for various reasons. And they have the attention span of an ant. most of the time. So you have to be completely prepared. You have to not just trust in your equipment, but you have to have this innate knowledge of your equipment that it's second nature. Like I can't be fumbling around with exposure and lenses and should I use this umbrella or should I use that softbox or that hair? No, it's like you got to just do it and know it and be prepared and be there early. And if something goes wrong, you got to fix it and you have to wing it sometimes. I've had to wing it many, many times. I'm sure you have and a lot of listeners have. But by winging it, I don't mean just make stuff up. I mean, use your experience of having been in these situations many, many times to get what the client wants and then go to the next level and get something that maybe you want that the client hadn't even thought of. So I take a lot of pride in that. And I take a lot of pride in the fact that I have clients that have been with me my entire career. They're, 35 plus years having the same clients. And there's a reason why they keep coming back. They're used to the quality that myself and my group now, my photographers who work for me and with me, we have a great work ethic. We're pretty seamless in terms of the quality that the client can expect and that we can produce. And, I take a lot of pride in that. It's very important to me.
You were on the road a lot, right? For a good part of your career?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and I know that for a while there, you were like a single dad. So, the challenge of being on the road as much as you were and raising kids is a difficult one, even if you're able to be relatively at home. So how did you work that out, man?
I have no idea. Somehow my kids turned out okay. I don't know. God bless them. I can't really answer that. I became a single dad. My kids were like 4 and 3-ish. It was a contentious divorce, to say the least, and not a very amicable custody situation, also to say the least. I don't know. I had some help. I had some friends and people around me that did help, and my kids were very adaptable. But it was tough. It was very, very difficult. And I had to plan my NBA career, my NBA travel life around my custody schedule. And I literally went back to NBA Photos, to the head of NBA Entertainment, Greg Winnick at the time. Had a meeting with him after my divorce was settled and my custody agreement was sealed. And I said, look, here's the deal, Greg. I want to keep working here. I think I'm a valuable asset. I hope that you guys still want me around, but I can't travel like I have been in the past. And he said, well, what's going to work for you? And at that time I was a full-time employee for the NBA. So I had, obviously an obligation to work a certain amount of days a month. And I said, well, look, if I have my kids every other weekend, and so if we can plan my travel schedule around that so that I'm home when my kids are there, and then maybe I don't have to work as many home games during my custody time and all that. And he said, Andy, whatever you need, we will do for you. I remember him saying it literally like it was yesterday. And I was very thankful. They really made it work. So when I say I don't know in my own mind how I survived it, quite honestly, because it was very pressure filled and I wanted to be as good a dad as I could be. But like I said, I had very resilient kids, wonderful kids that are now in their mid-20s. We look back at that time and laugh, kind of scratch our heads. I didn't know how to cook. So, they were eating like the same thing every single time that they were with me. But we had a lot of fun too, and it was a great bonding experience for us. And then I got remarried. When I got remarried, my kids were 10 and 9, and my stepdaughter was 10 at the time. And now, again, they're in their mid-20s, and we have a beautiful 12-year-old, my wife and I. So it's been an incredible journey. I've had a lot of support, a lot of people to lean on along the way, a great support system in my personal life and in my family. Very fortunate that I could somehow survive all that and still have a career that flourished.
One of the amazing things about your career that I can't help but think about is it's not just about the people that you've had the opportunity to photograph and get to know, but that you have been in proximity to a percentage of humanity that is just very unique, not just in terms of physicality, but just in terms of mindset. Because these men and women that get up to the pinnacle of sports are not just because they're physically endowed in some particular way. There is something in terms of the way they think, how they meet challenges, how they overcome obstacles that has earned them the place that they're in. And I'm wondering that being around that as much as you have, how did that color the way you were as a photographer?
Well, there's a lot of pressure to fit in. I succumbed to that pressure early in my career and realized that that wasn't actually the lifestyle and the route that I wanted to lead with my life, and that I didn't have to be like all the other guys. I was myself. And I think once I decided that that was the route I wanted to take, it took a lot of pressure off me that, look, either people are going to accept me the way I am, or they're not going to hang out with me. And if they don't hang out with me, it's not the end of the world. And I felt like, and I brought this from childhood and my teenage years, that I needed to be able to fit in. I needed to be able to, just be part of the group. And that, as I got older and I realized that that wasn't important to my job and it was a kind of a fake existence, that I relaxed. And I realized that what I brought to the table was an integrity and a trustworthiness that helped me get through many difficult situations that maybe some other photographers might not have been able to adapt to, being around professional athletes all the time and respecting their space, but also being able to do my job discreetly without fanfare, not making it about me. All those things are kind of intangibles that you can't really teach somebody. You could be the greatest photographer in the world and make the greatest pictures, but if people don't want you around, you're going to be taking pictures of, blank walls most of the time. And I truly love what I do, and I love being around the guys, and I love being part of the scene, but I'm happy being part of the furniture, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I don't have to be the center point, or I don't have to be the ringleader or anything like that, or really be a follower. I can just be me. And that took a long time to actually realize. But once I did, it was, like I said, it was very calming and empowering too.
One of those people was Kobe, Kobe Bryant, with whom you did the book Mamba Mentality, and I think you probably had one of the more unique relationships with him because you were there from pretty much day one. You took his first photograph as a Laker, for the roster, and there's an interesting story about after he had retired, you had approached him about doing a book.
Yeah.
And you came up with the proposal, but he kind of took it elsewhere. Tell us about that.
Well, I had spent 20 years with this amazing individual, and not just an athlete, but as a person. And I got to know him, as an 18-year-old rookie when I met him, was there every step of the way and documented every step of the way with him since day one. And was, I was more than grateful. I don't know if there's a better word than grateful, but just very humbled and grateful that he allowed me into his world, that he trusted me, that he wanted me to be the guy that documented his career, from the inside, although there's so many other photographers who, obviously documented his career, but I was really the guy that he trusted to be on the inside with him. That will stay with me forever. But he, was a unique individual. When we got to do our book together, it was just so amazing because he opened up so much, and I saw a side of him that I didn't really know about how introspective he was and how he studied my photography from the beginning, even before we met, and was able to build his game through my photography and videos that he had seen and other people's photography. So I was, it was very amazing process actually of doing that book with him. And thank God we did the book, because the book now is his legacy. And, I couldn't be more grateful than to have that opportunity to have done that with him. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah. Because it was. I was listening to the episode that you did with him for your podcast, "A Legend of the Sports," where you're talking about the book, and he made the point that he had looked at your work even before he had met you. Yeah. To analyze, what people were doing, like Michael Jordan, when he was boxed in, and analyzing the photographs in order to discern ways of being able to improve his game. And it was just like that level of focus was just amazing. And I never heard that particular story, especially associated with photography, but it gave me an even deeper appreciation for the man that he was, not just the athlete.
Yeah, I mean, that blew me away. When, one example was we were working on the chapter where he was talking about his relationship with Michael Jordan and how he studied all of Michael's nuances through my photos and other people's photos and videos and what have you. He wanted to see this particular picture that I had shot that he had remembered. I didn't remember taking it, but he remembered a picture of the young Kobe, probably first or second game he played against Michael, where he's D'ing up Michael. He went through this picture like it was a surgeon, like dissecting something. I mean, he said, look at where my hips are. Look at how my ankles turn. Look at how my elbow is like in his rib cage, blah, blah, blah. He says, you know what's going on in this picture? I said, not really. He said, I'm doing everything wrong in this picture. And I said, okay, well, forget about this picture. He goes, no. This has to go in. This has to be the first picture in the chapter because I want people to learn how I learned. If I'm looking at this picture, everything I did wrong and how I learned from that so that the next time I was in that situation with him, with Michael, I would have learned from it and corrected it and did it right.
Yeah.
So literally this picture is the lead picture of that chapter, and his caption says, everything I'm doing in this picture is wrong. I mean, who does that in their own book? Yeah. I don't know anybody who would really be that self-deprecating.
He has a great quote. Said, if you're not obsessed with what you do, we don't speak the same language.
Right.
And how did you feel like that applies to you?
You know, I didn't know that quote, and he didn't speak that quote till years and years later. But when I met him at 18, and I was 20 years older than him, there was just something that in this kid who said that he knew me, he knew about me, and we had never met before, but he knew me through my photos and all the posters he had, with my pictures, my photo credit on it growing up. I just knew something about this kid that just reminded me a little bit of myself at that age, at 18, 19 years old. Kind of brash, a little bit on the smart alecky side, driven, and yes, obsessed. So that this is really funny, but we were doing some interviews when the book came out in 2018, and one of the interviewers said something like, they said to Kobe, they said, well, you two are so alike, like, did you know that he was obsessed as you are about what he does? And Kobe said, yeah, of course. Why else would I have let him be in my world all these years? I looked at him and said, really? He goes, yeah, man, you're as crazy obsessed with what you do as what I do. So we had two completely different crafts. His was pounding the rock and dunking, and mine was recording that through my camera. But we were just as obsessed with what we did. It was always remarkable to me that, I'd come into Staples Center or the Forum, and he'd be the first guy out there warming up. And sometimes I would get there before him, and we just sort of nod at each other. It was kind of an unsaid thing, but years and years later, I kind of realized what that was all about, that we recognized in each other this crazy obsession that we had for what we did.
I am often surprised from where I hear praise about the show. My wife was at a meeting recently when she was told by a friend that she had friends in London who were big fans of the show. She then followed up by asking exactly what it was I did. Very, very funny. Nevertheless, I'm glad that those people in the know have managed to find us and to appreciate the work that we put in every week to produce this show, which provides a rare place for photographers to have and enjoy conversations that they wouldn't find anywhere else. If you have listened even to just a few episodes, you know how unique and special TCF is. And if you believe that, you can help us to make it happen every week. You can do so by becoming a Patreon supporter. You can contribute $5, $10, $20, or more a month by visiting patreon.com/thecandidframe. These modest amounts add up and provide us the means to keep the show growing and thriving. So if you enjoy the work we're doing, please come on as a Patreon supporter today. Thank you. You've gotten to photograph some amazing games, some historic moments, but I hear that the Dream Team, especially the Dream Team in '92, you have a special affinity for that first Olympic game where all these all-star basketball players got a chance to play and win.
Yeah.
Gold. So tell me, why is that, of all the events that you've covered, why is that one that resonates so much with you?
Well, I've said this before, that if I could have retired after that experience, that would have been a great career to that point. It was 1992. The NBA trusted me to be the guy, the lead photographer that was embedded with this team from day one of training camp through the gold medal, which was 7 solid weeks with them. I knew it then that this was something very, very special. I mean, people ask me a lot about certain photos of mine which have attained sort of an iconic thing over the years, and a lot of that is because when you look back at something, it's just attained this sort of level of iconic memory or legendary memory or whatever. But I knew at the time that this was an incredibly iconic assignment because there was never a team assembled like this. And the personalities on that team, the talent, Chuck Daly being the coach, I mean, all of it was just from top to bottom, stacked and legendary. So, I was grateful, but I was also a little bit intimidated, and I was also very nervous, like almost the entire time, that I would miss something or that, my work wasn't up to par with the subject matter at hand and all that kind of thing. That was a little bit, I guess, unfounded because, I did produce some good photography from that, and a lot of it got resurfaced during the Last Dance series that ESPN ran about the Bulls and the Jordan era, where they spent a lot of time about the Dream Team, and actually brought up some of my photos during that, which was super cool. But it was a great experience, and every photographer should have that assignment, that plum assignment that they could always point to as, wow, that was just head and shoulders above any other assignment I ever got.
Yeah.
And I've had some great assignments, I got to tell you, but nothing will ever come close to that.
One of the things about photographing sports that you have to be adept at is knowing the sport.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have to be sort of almost like a savant in terms of anticipation.
Yeah.
In terms of what's about to happen. But to a certain degree, I think that you also have to know the players to a certain degree. So given that, were there certain players who you really had fun photographing not just because of what they did in terms of their athleticism? Is it what they ended up giving you as a photographer?
Yeah, it's a great 2-part question. I want to answer the first part first, because when I really realized I needed to build my portfolio to be a sports photographer, in my mind, that meant that I had to shoot every sport known to man and women because I needed to have this broad portfolio. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but I just felt like I needed to shoot everything. And at the time, my dad was living in Colorado Springs, which is the home of the U.S. Olympic Committee. And they had, at the time, to qualify for the Olympics, they had what was called the National Sports Festival, where every Olympic sport was qualified for, every summer Olympic sport. So I went out there. Somehow, I don't even know how I got a credential, quite honestly, but I got a credential to shoot it. And I was shooting 5-6 different sports a day. I mean, rhythmic gymnastics. I was shooting rugby. I mean, I'm just thinking all that. I was shooting like yachting, equestrian stuff, bicycling, all this stuff. I mean, what do I know about any of that stuff? But I knew as a photographer that I had to create some pictures. So maybe I didn't know the sport that well kind of helped me. I don't know. And then fast forward a few years later, my first job was as a team photographer was to be the team photographer for the LA Aztecs soccer team. I'd never seen a soccer game in my life. I grew up in New York. We didn't even know soccer. I had no idea that soccer was a sport growing up in Brooklyn. I'm being totally honest with you. So the guy hires me from the LA Aztecs, and I guess he assumes that I had seen soccer. I'd never seen a game anywhere on TV. I didn't know how it was played. So I go out there to the field to shoot my first scrimmage, or whatever they call it. And I think I was told it was not a field; it's a pitch, by the way, which I didn't know. And I'm thinking, this is a lot like football. It's kind of like hockey, and it's like neither of those sports. But Anyway, I just kind of learned on the fly. I had no equipment back then. So to answer the second part of your question, yes, I had to learn how athletes played, and most specifically Magic Johnson comes to mind, because if I didn't study Magic's game by trial and error, quite frankly, by shooting so many games with him and missing a lot of things because I mistimed or I just wasn't ready or just not present in the moment, I don't think I could have progressed as a sports photographer, and I wouldn't have been able to capture these great moments in his career and Jordan's career and Kobe's career and all these guys that came later. So I have a tremendous amount of gratitude to Magic for teaching me how to be patient, how to study, how to come back from frustration and failure, quite honestly, because there's so many games I would look at my film afterwards and just shake my head like I shouldn't even have been there. But I would come back and maybe not miss as many shots the next game and learn from that. And shooting with this strobe technique of using these giant flashes in the ceiling, you can only shoot one picture every 4 seconds. So there's no motor drive situation where I can lean on a motor drive as Magic's coming down full speed down the court in front of me, not knowing what he's going to do, in a split second. So it really is a lot of, I like to call it ESP, got to have a teeny bit of anticipation, be a little bit ahead of the game, but that comes from preparation, from experience, and quite frankly, a lot from error and from failure. From failure, usually comes learning, and from learning comes the rewards of getting a great shot.
You just said something interesting about being in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about developing that particular skill, because you've talked about understanding strobe and just standing your camera, knowing the game, learning how to be present in the moment. That's a Zen skill.
Oh yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So tell me about how you developed that in terms of your sports photography.
Well, I learned very early that if I am caught up in the emotion of a crazy pandemonium-filled arena, and there's a last-second shot happening, or the NBA Finals are about to end, and all hell is going to break loose on the court. If I'm caught up in that, then I'm not doing my job. I should just be home watching it on TV like everybody else from their sofa. Mm-hmm. And I also learned that if I actually see the photo happen through the viewfinder, I miss the picture, because the shutter, as you know, the shutter should be closing in the moment that the picture is taken. So I shouldn't be seeing it. It means I missed it. And we don't get that opportunity back in our world in sports photography. You can't say, oh, yeah, well, hold on, like a model. Like, can you do that pose again, or fix that lighting, or whatever? So that doesn't happen. And then that sort of gelled when I got to be around Phil Jackson a lot. And I got to see how Phil was able to center himself, even in the most jam-packed, pressure-filled moments. I would see Phil on the bench, just sort of, tying his shoelaces, or, look at his fingernails, and, it's like a 1-point game going on or whatever. And then watching Kobe and how he prepared for games and his mental preparation, how he meditated. I was just blown away by this guy who could literally fall asleep on a massage table an hour and a half before game time, and his heartbeat was, just barely going, and my heart would be pumping like crazy because I knew this game was going to start. Seeing him, he would literally stand there during the national anthem with his eyes closed, meditating during the anthem of an NBA Finals game, and all the other guys are fidgeting around, or they might be looking somewhere else. No, but Kobe was totally centered in himself, taking himself out of the moment, very Zen-like. So very inspiring. That sort of permeated not just, my work life, but kind of moved into my crazy personal life at the time, which really needed to be present, especially with young children. Wasn't always great at it, but at least it was a skill that I could take from my work life into my personal life.
You talked about some other photographic greats like Neil Leifer and Peter Reed Miller. Mm-hmm. It must have been great to see them as a peer, people whose work you admired for God knows how long. Mm-hmm. But I'm curious, is there a picture that one of your photographic heroes took, who you got to know, that you think, God, I wish I had made that photograph?
Well,
what it is.
How much time do we have? There's like a million of them. But I've learned from that, and I admire these guys so much. I mean, John Zimmerman, who people might not know was really the godfather of sort of remote photography, putting remotes into crazy places in arenas for basketball and hockey. He's the first guy to put a camera behind the backboard. He's the first guy to probably put a camera in the catwalk, that kind of thing. And then Neil Leifer and Walter, and what they were able to do. When I teach photography, I always bring their work, the masters. These guys are that's the Mount Rushmore of sports photography we're talking about here. Neil Leifer's Ali over Liston picture, literally voted the most iconic sports photo ever taken. And knowing the story behind it, and having met Neil and having him take me through how that picture happened. And Walter Yost was just recently on my podcast, and we talked about so many of his iconic moments. But the fact that his preparation and his knowledge, everything you talked about earlier, and learning the game and being in the moment really helped him get these unbelievable, iconic photographs that will live forever. The Dwight Clark catch, for example, Joe Namath. I mean, you can name a million of them. So, I'm hoping that this new generation of sports photographers maybe looks at my work, Nat Butler's work, John McDonough's work, my colleagues that I've been sitting next to for years, and they're able to say, wow, maybe one day I'll be able to take a picture like that, and maybe somebody like yourself will ask them that, and that means a lot to me. If I can inspire people with my work, I was so inspired by those greats and continue to be. I still break out Neil's book or Walter's book and just am dumbfounded as to the stuff that I can. And let's keep in mind, they were shooting in crappy lighting with film cameras, with film that wasn't particularly suited for that kind of work.
Right.
That's why they perfected the strobe technique for indoor arenas, which was so revolutionary at the time. And they were just trailblazers. And on top of that, they were incredible guys. They still are. I mean, Neil Leifer, God bless him. The guy, I don't even want to say how old he is, but he still is working and is pumped up as he always has been his whole career. It's unbelievable. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about your podcast. How did you come to decide to put down the camera for a little bit and pick up a microphone?
Well, I had met so many great people along the way, and it was always been so fascinated by people's stories, what made them who they are, what made them great. Guys like Magic, I know his story. I know Shaq's story. I know about Phil Jackson, Dr. Buss. I mean, people like that who I've just always been fascinated with what made somebody who they are. What were those moments? Who were their mentors? What was that epiphany in their life? That pivotal moment in time when they, that switch went on, just like me, you talked about earlier, and that light went on when I was, a young photographer in the darkroom. And quite frankly, I knew that my career as a sports photographer, on site, is not going to be forever. Physically, it takes a toll. I didn't want to be traveling as much as I was. So I still love what I do, of course. So I was looking for a way to kind of meld both of those. And at the same time, my love for the legends of the game, of every game, every game I've ever been around, but especially basketball, and wanting to help those guys kind of redirect the spotlight back on them a little bit. And maybe, through my Legends of Sport platform, make them marketable again, or introduce them to a whole new generation of people who grew up hearing their names, through their parents, through their dad, or maybe they were, dragged to a game as like a 5-year-old, but they didn't, or maybe they never saw people play. This whole generation had never seen Michael Jordan play, right? So they're watching The Last Dance, thinking they're looking at Babe Ruth or something, but, this is a real person who accomplished so much. So I want to be able to tell those stories. And I really, truly love talking to people, and especially in my business. So we set out, myself and 2 partners, we set out to launch this platform 3 years ago through the podcast. And to date, I've done about 88, 89 podcasts over 2.5, almost 3 seasons. And this season, we partnered with the LA Times to co-produce and for them to distribute the podcast along with all your favorite podcast networks, platforms like Spotify and Apple. So it's been a great a great connection, a great marriage with the LA Times. They're wonderful people to work with. They have a great podcast platform, which people in LA probably are familiar with, but maybe not as much outside of LA. So we're trying to help them, with that as well. And we came up with the series of 16 episodes, one a week during this whole restart of the NBA and WNBA during the bubble situations in Florida. So each week has a theme, and we'll go through the end of the NBA Finals, which is scheduled to be about mid-October. So every week we do a theme. It's been a lot of fun, kind of talking to people who are in the bubble. I'm going to be going down there myself in a few weeks, but also talking to legendary coaches, NBA personnel, of course, former players, broadcasters, people who can really put a legend's spin and a legend's perspective on what's going on right now. So it's very relevant, but it's also, to me, it's super interesting because you're hearing from people from the past who really can lend a lot of perspective to what's going on.
You're interviewing people who you've known for a while. Mm-hmm. Did you have an interview where you sat down with a person where you were surprised and discovered something that you hadn't known, even though you had known them for so long?
I literally find that out every single time. And I have a great producer and researcher, Veronica, who I don't know where she comes up with a lot of this stuff, honestly. She reads so much and she takes such deep dives, and it doesn't even matter who the guest is. There's always a nugget. There's always something. Like, for example, this week I have Mike D'Antoni on, who is, the coach of the Houston Rockets. I know Mike. I've known him for years, and he and his wife, and at dinners with him socially. I've traveled with them. And, I didn't know, why he ended up in Italy, playing in Italy. I'd never actually asked him that. And he's a legend in Italy. I didn't know that he and Laurel, his wife, met in Italy, that she was a model. All these things. Even on the professional side, there's so many things that I find out, especially like Kobe told me so many things about who he would reach out to just to pick their brain about greatness. And, we've heard some stories, but there were things that I had heard that I had never heard, and especially from him. Peter Guber, the same way. Peter Guber, owner of the Warriors, owner of the Dodgers, a mogul in the entertainment world. But he was like this Red Sox fan growing up who couldn't even afford to go to Fenway Park. He had to stand out in Yawkey Way and hope to catch a home run over the Green Monster out in the street. I didn't know that. Who knew that? So this is all fascinating things. And all of these things kind of made the person who they are. And that's why I want to talk to them, because I'm just interested as a fan, as a friend, but also I want to bring that to the public as well. And it's inspiring, and it's exciting for me.
My last question, which I ask each guest, is I ask them to recommend another photographer, and it can be anyone, someone you've long admired or someone you've recently discovered. So who would that photographer be and why?
Wow. Oh boy, that's a really tough question. So many come to mind right off the top of my head. I'm a big admirer of Danny Clinch. Mm-hmm. And Danny is not a sports photographer. Danny is a music photographer, but his portraiture and his way of working with musicians on the same sort of iconic level as athletes that I work with, I just admire him so much. I don't know Danny personally. We've corresponded a couple of times. My wife bought me a couple of original prints of his. I just got his book for Father's Day and sent him one of my books, and one day we will meet. He's had the dream job for years, being my idol, Bruce Springsteen's personal photographer. So a little jealous about that, I must say. But
you've done okay.
He's just amazing, and I encourage everybody to look him up. Danny Clinch, just incredible work.
I interviewed him last year. He's a gem.
Yeah, for sure. I'm glad you got to meet him, because I look forward to the time when I can sit down with him over a beer or two at Asbury Park on the boardwalk and just shoot the breeze about photography and life, because he's quite an interesting guy.
Yeah. Well, Andy, so are you. And thank you so much for making time for us today. I really enjoyed it.
Well, I enjoyed it too. Thanks so much. And anytime I'll come back, maybe after the bubble situation, and we can rehash how that went. And maybe life is getting back to normal and we can actually see each other.
Thanks to Andy for joining us. Find out more about him and his work by visiting adbappy.com. And don't forget to listen and subscribe to his podcast, Legends of Sport. If you're a devoted listener and subscribe to the show, write us a review on whatever service you listen to podcasts. Those reviews have allowed us to grow. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel and our mailing list. On the YouTube channel, I offer critiques on images submitted by TCF listeners like you, while the mailing list keeps you updated with all TCF events, including workshops and more. Sign up today. And remember, you can support the show by contributing to our Patreon effort or make a one-time or recurring donation via PayPal. Thanks to Bijan Eric for his recent contribution. We also provide a series of ebooks on photography available for purchase on our website. It's my way of sharing my experience and knowledge and another way for you to support the show. And if you can't find every episode of the show, download the Candid Frame app, which is available for both Apple iOS and Android. And because of your generosity, it's free to download and use. No additional purchases are required. The Candid Frame's audio engineer is Martin Taylor, who you can find at theothermartintaylor.com. The show's senior producer is Cynthia Parker. And our music is from Kevin MacLeod, whose royalty-free music can be found at incompetech.com. And this is Ibarian X, and this is The Candid Frame.